Bring to us your poetry from inspiration sought. Come join us with your images, your verses, words, and thought. From here, we'll share your balladry with those who do not know it. This platform's here for you to show the world that you're the poet.
Welcome to episode 17 of You're the Poet, the poetry podcast featuring you. I'm host Matt Bergio, and I'm here with co host Phil Bergio. Phil, welcome.
Thank you.
Here at You're the Poet, our purpose is to share our love of poetry with the world and invite you to do the same. I want to start by saying thank you to all of our guests and especially our listeners who have made You're the Poet possible. We hope you enjoy the podcast and the poetry that is shared here. Our featured guest for this episode of You're the Poet is Richard Ebner. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Matt, and hello to your dad, Philip, and your wonderful dog, Oreo.
All right, thank you. We're glad you could join us, and we look forward to your contribution to the episode. To start things off, I'm going to turn it over to Phil to read our classic poem for the episode. Phil?
Yeah, this is a poem by Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson, early 19th century. She was born December 10th, 1830, and she died May 15th, 1886, at the age of 55. From Amherst, Massachusetts. Her neighbors thought she was eccentric, and she's very reclusive. I'm not going to go into much detail about her. If our listeners want any more information, check her out on Wikipedia. There's a pretty good article about her. Okay, this poem is called In the Garden. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in half and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, to silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon lead splashless as they swim. Emily Dickinson.
All right, well, thank you for sharing. I like that poem. I like that I can picture the scene. I've definitely been on park benches and things where I watch birds kind of hop along, and remind me of recently this season at Kings Island where I was eating my La Rosas and feeding the little sparrows, tossing them crumbs and watching them eat that.
La Rosa's is a local pizza place.
Gotcha. I'm pretty eclectic with my poetry interests, and Emily Dickinson is one for sure, and Longfellow, and Yeats, and lots of them. I tend to really like the poems that don't worry about rhyming and that go wherever they want to go, because that's the beauty to me of poetry. It's the freedom to express yourself any way you want. So yeah, Emily gets there for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know a lot of my poetry tends to stick with forms, but I do like the kind of the free expression of the poetry, like you were saying, where people just kind of let it go and kind of let the words take them there.
Yeah, I tried to pick some of the earlier poems of people that you don't think have written poetry, like Robert Louis Stevenson. Everybody thinks of Treasure Island, but he was a very prolific poet.
Yes, yes.
All right, from there, we're going to move to my poem of the episode. This is a three-part poem that I wrote over a series of years and it was over a series of experiences. This one's about vultures. And this time of year, the vultures are on the move. They're migrating. And so it had me thinking about that as I was watching some sit in the trees near my house the other day. So I'll say a little more about it at the end. But this is basically three different scenes. Vultures. Death's darkened watchers roost above, their huddled masses hunched and black. I gently give my dog a shove to coax her on as she pulls back. Their whispers are an eerie hiss, which in these woods seems so amiss. Through graveyard scene along the bank, on either side of water broke, disturbing not a century's rank, canoer silence every stroke. With gurgled growl and eyes set hard, they sit and stare in river guard. They loom atop the lodge and trees, patrolling quietly the park. They do so with an expertise for which I've found to be their mark, a staunch and chilling gathered host who diligently stand their post. Matthew Bergio. So that was a three-part poem, Vultures. Maybe added to later in the future, I don't know, but those were three different scenes. Obviously, the first one, I was walking my dog and, we came upon a whole bunch of the vultures in the trees above us. The dog was not very happy with that. The second was canoeing trip. We were canoeing, and all of a sudden it was very eerie. Just
Creepy. Yeah.
yeah, it's right. You were with me.
Yes. The river kind of narrowed there, and both sides were just loaded with vultures. And it was like creepy,
Yeah,
waiting for a dinosaur to jump out of the woods.
definitely. And then the third one was out at a state park near here where they were up on the lodge, just kind of keeping guard and watching the park. Always interested in the vultures. I know a lot of people don't give them a lot of credit because they're ugly and they're eating dead things by the road, but find them to be fascinating birds.
Well, first of all, I disagree. They're not ugly. They have their own beauty. Secondly, it makes me think of Alfred Hitchcock
Ah,
and the movie The Birds.
the birds. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a rare moment in it. My father was a general semanticist, and I don't know if you know what that is, but it was created by Albert Korzybski, who was a Polish philosopher or whatever. And it's a way to look at language. And there's a small, very small moment in The Birds where the major female character says that she was taking general semantics at Berkeley. And I'm on this website with other general semanticists, and most of them never pick that out.
Hmm.
But the movie Birds, I think, is very interesting because birds are a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the corvids, the crows and ravens.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, nice. Well, from here, we're going to turn it back over to Phil to share his poem for the episode. Phil?
This has become like a birding thing because my poem's about birds. It wasn't planned that way. This is Flicker Feather. I found a flicker feather while I walked on the lane today. No doubt of what it was, I identified it right away. The bright yellow shaft was hard to miss. It appeared to have received a golden kiss, a Helios blessing or Midas touch. I imagine they loved that bird so much. I love the beauty of the birds, their splendor and color and chirping words. I left the feather along the way so others could enjoy it where it lay. Philip Bergia. I wrote most of my poems just like inspiration. I found this flicker feather. I don't know if you're familiar with birds and flickers, but okay, their shaft is bright yellow. It's really cool.
Yes.
They are definitely a pretty bird. I like the markings on the flicker in general.
And the most wonderful thing for me about it was that you left the feather for somebody else to see.
Hmm. Yeah, well, technically, it's a fine if you pick up feathers and keep them.
I know. But you paid it forward.
Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely. Like I said, I like the flickers for their markings, but also I love that the sound they make because it reminds me of the pileated woodpecker, which is one of my favorite birds.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we're birders here.
I have video that I shot of a well, what do you call the one that was very famous, used in cartoons?
Pileated woodpecker, the one with the red crest.
Yes, exactly. And I got a 40-second video of this pileated going up and down a tree in my backyard.
Nice.
I was thrilled.
That's one of my favorite birds.
Yeah, mine too.
Woody the Woodpecker. That's it.
That's
Yes.
it. That's it. Yes.
Yes, he was a pileated, I believe, or inspired by the pileated.
Inspired by pileated. They're talking about bringing the ivory-billed woodpecker back and using pileated as the surrogate through genetics and DNA and that.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
All right, from here we want to move to our guest section of the episode. Richard, you're the poet. Show us what you've got.
All right. So this poem is called Woodland Dream, and it is in one of my books. If you were reading my book, you would understand this. So I'm going to give you a little thing because you're not reading my book, so you know what's going on here. So the dog in the dream was my Great Dane named Misty, and she was very real. She wasn't a dream. So here you go. Woodland Dream. We walked in your splendor last night, my dog and I. You stood there so proudly with your relatives all around. I breathed in the cold air that surrounded you and viewed the ice that weighed heavy on your limbs. You were so beautiful, softly speaking, with the wind in the peace of the night. You made magnificent shadows on the moonlight snow beneath you. So great is your strength to stand all night in the cold with no complaints. And so deep is your beauty, it made my heart swell just to look at you. Even after you die, you will stand for many a year, giving yourself as home to other living things. You are food. You are warmth. You are shelter. You will always remain my winter woodland dream. Richard Ebner, written in 1979, before you were born, Matthew.
Actually, I was born the last 3 days of 1978.
Okay, sorry.
I get it.
Close though. Yeah. Yeah.
Very close. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I feel like there's more to the poem that's right on the surface. But I think I mentioned in an email to you that I really enjoyed this poem. And I know this is about a singular tree, but it really reminded me of trees that I saw on a winter walk one time. And perhaps in the winter, I'll share my poem, Winter's Wondrous View, that reminded me of this.
Yeah, yeah. So it was 1978 on Christmas Day that I went to the White Mountains of New Hampshire with my dog, Misty, a Great Dane, to get away from all my drug influences and addictions and everything. And I spent 3 months there, isolated, and it worked. So that was great. That poem comes out of the book called Staying Stoned. I wasn't stoned the entire time. A lot of what I do right now, my two passions that I think I told you about, Matthew, are helping people with elderly care issues and helping those with substance abuse issues.
Two noble causes.
And that's basically what my two books are about.
I was going to say, do you want to tell the audience a little more about Staying Stoned?
Sure. I actually recorded it on magnetic tape back before there was Google or any of this stuff. And then it took almost 40 years for me to get it transcribed and out there as a published book. So basically, the story is my experience there in real time, and then my reflecting on moments in my life using all kinds of different drugs, cocaine and mushrooms and LSD and on and on. It's technically, I guess, a memoir, but it's a little funky.
Okay. If our listeners are interested in finding that, is that available online for purchase or?
It's available everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, at my website, richardebner.com, anywhere all around the world.
Okay, great.
Got another one for us, Richard.
I do. This is called The 40-Year Rescue. 40 years in the wilderness is a long time. It is a long time to hold a grudge. It is a long time to remain blind to love. For 40 years, I could not see my papa. Then macular degeneration opened our eyes. At 88, papa's blindness allowed him to finally see me. And his cognitive losses let me see him. He had been confined to a low-level nursing home, imprisoned there against his free will, misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's. 2 doctors, 1 lawyer, and a woman did this. The doctors were short on time, as doctors often are. The lawyer thought it an open and shut case. And the woman, well, she wanted his house and the money in his will. But Papa still had a life to live and stories to tell. So, at 40 and 88, we started over. Our anger was softened by the love of a Great Dane. The Dane's name was Baby, and she aimed to tame. In the 9 years that followed, love won. Baby, with her whip of a tail, rescued father and son. The 40 years in the wilderness were finally overcome, and the prison break was successfully done. Richard Ebner.
All right. Thank you for
Well, I
sharing.
like that.
Yeah, I was really hoping you would share this one. I had actually read this one on Facebook or on your webpage, and I was like, I really hope he shares this poem because it really struck me. I have this thing for father-son relationships. I mean, doing this podcast with my dad.
Yep.
I mean, I have been blessed that I've had a great relationship with my dad growing up, and I know that's not always the case for everyone, but I'm glad
I'm
you shared
touched.
this, and I'm glad you were able to reconcile things with your father.
And did you note that this was modified specifically for this podcast?
Ah,
Yeah, I saw that when you mentioned that.
explain, please.
Oh, well, I just, as poets do, you reread it and you say, no, there could be something more there. I could change this a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I understand.
So I just did some of that.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad you shared that. Thank you.
And one of the serendipities of all of this is that I'm just so struck by your relationship with your dad and Philip's relationship with you, Matthew. And that is something that, I'm an agnostic. I let the mystery be. I don't necessarily believe in a God. But both my parents were atheists, so that was a little difficult to deal with. However, I feel like there are things out there that we can't explain. So why did you find me and I found you? I mean, plenty of other poets out there.
I don't know. I'm one of those people that kind of believe in fate and if things come together. And it's been interesting on this podcast, some of the guests that we've had and things that they've been able to express through the podcast, or even just to write poetry in general. We had one guy that started writing poetry again just because he heard the podcast.
Oh, that's great.
So it makes us feel good for doing this endeavor.
No, you're doing a good thing.
And like I said, for me, it's great that I'm getting to do a project with my father. That means a lot to me if you listened to episode 1, he's been one of my greatest poetry influences.
I did listen to episode 1 and several others, by the way.
Excellent.
A lot of good ones out there. Well, they're all good in their own ways.
And you thought episode 1 was rough. I don't think so. I think it was perfect.
Yeah, it was a start.
He surprised me when he introduced me as his co-host. I thought I was just going to read a poem. It's like, what? Here I am. He's forcing me to write poetry. Not forcing me, but making me think more about writing poetry. So
Inspiring you.
there you go, inspiring me. So I've been writing poems, like started one today, watching the football game. Poem's not about football, but just sitting there and writing.
Well, it's funny. When I turned 30, I threw away all of my poems that I had written. There was nothing digital to record them on, and I threw away all my art.
Ah,
And not that I'm recommending that to others, but it was kind of liberating for me.
Wow. Yeah, I try to hang on to everything. I'm one of those people that, good or bad, I feel like I got to hang on to stuff and I try to keep it all collected and organized. And
I have to organize mine. I'll find poems written on napkins, especially haikus.
Yeah, well, the haiku, I actually did a book of haikus. My mom wrote all the haikus and I did all the drawings for it. And it was called Haikus for the 12 Zodiac Signs. So there were 12 of them.
Ah, okay.
neat.
The one thing that I have a hard time with haiku, being a rebel, is the structure is too hard for me. I've written a couple, but I like the freedom of going anywhere you want.
It's interesting. My sister was saying the same thing, and I'm not bragging, but I can just pop out a haiku just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That haiku episode was number 10. We're talking about episode 20, maybe doing one on limericks.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Think about that. Write yourself a limerick,
I've got a bunch of them.
but they got to be PG-13.
I know. And that's the hard thing about limericks. They're usually pretty,
Pretty bawdy. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you more information on that. That'll be coming out very soon because episode 20 is creeping up on us.
Yeah. I never thought I'd get this far. You got one more for us, Richard?
I do. And this is totally different. It's called objectify. The caveman picked a mate by size and shape, and still today we sell that way. Out on the town, he looks around. There's a pretty girl he sees. She's not fat, but she could be skinnier. The night is young, and so is he. Not the time to settle. Another club he shall try. A gorgeous face catches his eye. This girl is stunning. Radar on, he goes gunning. Why, oh, why do we objectify? Are shapes and forms all we can see? Why, oh, why do we objectify? Is this all we can be? Chasing skirt is a manly pursuit, or so they say. And big boys don't cry, even when rejected. They just regroup and search for other prey. This is not what I want a man to be. And this is not who I am. Big boys should learn how to cry, for in the crying there are healings. Look less with your eyes and more with your feelings. Richard Ebner, 2023.
Good one. I like that. I wrote a poem about that it's called Soul Cleansing, and it has to do with thinking of things that make me sad and getting out of it by tears running down my cheek. Yep. I taught my boys how to be sensitive and treat women right, and I don't want to use this word, don't be knuckleheads about it. I think I raised them pretty good. I got 3 sons.
Well, there is scientific proof that the chemicals in tears actually do create healing. So if you tell your children, especially boys, oh, it's all right, don't cry, you close off that physical healing process.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely gone through my life trying to live with honor, trying to, as my dad said, he did. We were raised to treat women with respect. I've never really been one of those guys to objectify women. I've always tried to treat them with respect and look deeper than just the looks. You look at their personality, see them for who they are. And, my wife even always tells me I'm such an emotional person.
Well, that's a good thing.
I'm the kind of guy that'll tear up during a movie, if there's a sad or even really happy part. And she always makes fun of me for that. So,
Yeah, that happens, man. That happens. Hey, like I got all teary-eyed when Darth Vader died in Star Wars.
Well, sometimes I tear up more during the happy moments, actually.
Yeah.
yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
It strikes that chord with you of empathizing with what's going on, and you feel it.
I agree.
Right.
And I feel like I'm a very empathetic person. I think that's a lot of what it is. You kind of really relate to the character, you feel for them.
Absolutely. Hey, I knew I'd like you too.
Well, we're definitely very glad that you came onto the show. It's always hard to find guests because I feel like people think it's a scam when I'm talking to you on Facebook or I'm try to like throw it out there. But a lot of times I just read somebody's works. I'm like, okay, this sounds like this is a poetry and a poet that would click with our show. So I try to reach out and get a hold of people. And I'm glad we found you.
Yep. Definitely.
You know what might put some people off is the buy us a cup of coffee, because that is just such a standard phrase on a lot of different sites. You might want to change it to sport me to a cup of tea or something. Just make it a little different.
Right. Yeah, that's a very generic thing and a work in progress. We haven't done a whole lot with our patron page. That's something that's still in the works.
Yeah. I can see that you could really attract advertisers to your site.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in the future.
If we had a few bucks, we wouldn't have to like split up the recording.
Well, right. You could go for premium Zoom.
Right.
Right, right. Like I said, it's all work in progress and it's just a project we kind of do on the side and we're loving it. But wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to promote? Whether it's other books, other websites, other projects?
Well, my two books that are out there currently, we already talked about a little bit. Staying Stoned is one, and Saving Papa's Tales is the other one. I will send you more info about the Virtue Services Network, because that could be very helpful for a lot of people. There's no cost to join it. You don't even have to buy a cup of coffee.
Tell us a little bit about that, what that network is.
Well, it's a guy I met. He's a PhD in Lowell, Massachusetts. So I'm actually a couple 100 miles away from him, but we do a Zoom thing every Monday morning. And what he's trying to do, he has a very different way of looking at addiction, and he's trying to promote harm reduction. So no matter what somebody is doing, if you do less of it and you're not ready to totally quit yet with whatever your addiction is, by doing less, you're still reducing your harm. And then eventually, as you start to realize that a sober life is probably a better life for you.
I want to share that with some friends. I have a lot of friends that are recovered alcoholics or drug addicts, and I'd like to share that.
I already did send the link to it to Matthew.
Okay, good.
If you send me your own email, I'll send a link directly to you, Philip.
Sounds good.
But yeah, he's just got a very different way. And actually, he's kind of responsible for the book Staying Stoned to actually finally get published, because I had tried to publish it back, when Ronald Reagan was doing the war against drugs, and that didn't really work very well.
Say no to drugs. Yeah, Nancy Reagan, say no to drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
I heard in Mexico, the new president is going to stop the war on drugs, but that's something different. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's with capitalism, what you have to do is decrease the demand,
Right, right.
and that has to do with therapy and helping people find another way. So anyway, this Dr. Greg LeBranche, I met him and I got involved and actually went out with him on the streets with a dog, of course, helped heroin addicts and get them off the streets and whatnot. And we got friendly. And then he heard about the book I had written, and he's the one who got me to go publish it.
Sweet. Okay.
All right, that sounds great. We'll definitely include that link in our episode notes and things so our listeners can find that.
Cool.
All right, well, from that, we're going to move on with the episode. We've got a little bit of feedback for the episode. Phil's going to share this. I know I normally share
Yeah.
the feedback.
I got a text message from one of our friends. He and his son were listening to the podcast. He says, this is for Micah. Micah's his son, 14-year-old kid. We were listening to one of the podcasts, Haiku. I didn't first tell him that it was you and Matt. The following conversation occurred. Micah, that sounds like Mr. Burgio. Me, it is, and his son Matthew. Micah said, Mr. Burgio does poetry. What doesn't he do? He's a Viking, a ninja, a chef, and a poet. I'm surprised he remembered about the pirate thing because he was like really little and we were at his grandma's funeral. And, to keep the kids occupied, I sat down and started talking to Micah and he is playing the pirate. So I was his Smeed to his Captain Hook.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's nice having feedback from kids.
And a great story, the whole Captain Hook story.
Yeah, definitely. As we wrap things up, we want to let our listeners know that we are grateful that you've taken the time to tune in. We hope you're enjoying the poetry shared here. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. Now that the You're the Poet community is expanding at a rapid rate, we have set up a patron site for those who would like to show their support for You're the Poet. You can find us on buymeacoffee.com/you'rethepoet. Thank you for your support as we continue to grow. If you've written any poetry and you want to share it here, whether you just have an interest in poetry, consider yourself an amateur poet, or a professional poet with published works, contact us to be a guest on a future episode. Please check out the website at www.yourethepoet.com. There's a section there that answers questions about being a guest. Follow us on Facebook for updates and info, and send us an email to host@yourethepoet.com for feedback or questions about the podcast and how to be our next guest. Until next time, Phil, thanks for joining us.
Anytime.
Richard, thanks for being our guest.
You're most welcome, Matthew and Phil and Oreo.
Yeah.
I do have to say before we leave, Richard, I love your love of dogs, how that's in your poetry and how you've talked about Oreo here and we introduced you at the beginning.
Well, I have an easy time remembering dogs' names, but I'm not so good with adults.
I feel you there. All right, guys. Well, thank you and goodbye.